And please give a warm round of applause for Roger Dingledine.
Okay, hi everybody. Is the microphone working? It sounds like it is. Excellent. How many people here know how Tor works or have run Tor, Tor browser? Awesome, great. How many people here know words like bridges and pluggable transports? Bunch of hands also, perfect. Okay, so I'm gonna talk a little bit about the intro to Tor for those who didn't raise their hands. I'll try to get through that quickly. And then I'm going to talk about intro to Tor and censorship and try to get through that quickly. And then talk about what has happened in Russia over the past few years, what's happened in Iran last year, and what's happened in Turkmenistan this year. And then we'll talk about policy and political questions that come from that. Okay, so Tor is a free software project. Tor is a nonprofit. One of the fun things about Tor is the community of people all around the world. Any city you go to these days has a university where professors are doing Tor research, and there are grad students interested in this. We have somewhere between 2 million and 8 million daily users. It's an anonymity system, so it's a bit hard to tell exactly how many we have. And we're part of larger ecosystems, the internet freedom world, the free software world, censorship research, anonymity research. So big picture, we've got Alice here. She's trying to get to some website like Bob and do it safely. There are a bunch of places the attacker can be. Maybe the attacker is watching Alice's local network. Maybe it's Starbucks or somebody running the Wi-Fi here. They're trying to learn what Alice is doing. Or maybe the attacker is inside the network, Deutsche Telekom, NSA, something like that. And they're trying to learn which Alices went to which Bobs. Or maybe the attacker is on the Bob side. Maybe it's CNN and they want to know who their users are. Or maybe it's somebody watching WikiLeaks trying to figure out who is connecting to it. So these are all the types of attacks that we think about in terms of an anonymity system. And encryption is important. You should use encryption. But even when you're using encryption, people watching you get to learn who you talk to, how long you talk, when you talk, things like that. When the CIA tries to attack things, they're not trying to break the encryption these days. They build the social graph of this person talks to this person, so let's break into his house and install something on his laptop. So encryption is good, but it's not enough. And another way of looking at that is communications metadata. Not too many years ago, there was creepy NSA dude with his phrase, "We kill people based on metadata." So the goal of Tor is to protect not just the contents of your communications, but the metadata of your communications as well. So another way of looking at that, I actually only use the word anonymity when I'm talking to other researchers. When I'm talking to my parents, I tell them I'm working on a privacy system. Anonymity, I'm not sure, but privacy is an important thing for the world to have. When I'm talking to companies, I work on communications security, because they don't care about privacy. Privacy is dead, but communication security is important to have. And when I'm talking to governments, I work on traffic analysis resistant communication networks. And again, it's the same system, but telling governments you've got an anonymity system, they don't want that. Privacy, why would we want that? Security, we've got lots of that. Oh, traffic analysis resistance, yes, we do need that. So part of the fun of this is to get all those users into the same anonymity set, so you have the Egyptian activist and the German BND guy and the cancer survivor all in the same anonymity set, so they blend together. And then there's another category we're going to talk a lot about today, which is the reachability side for human rights, where I want to reach BBC and my local network doesn't let me do it. Okay, so how do you build one of these? The easy answer is a big centralized system like a VPN, where all the connections come in and then they get proxied to somewhere else. And the first problem there is what happens if that central point is evil and they're actually Turns out they do log. Turns out they do give their logs out. Who knows? It's hard to tell these things in a centralized system. But it's worse than that. What if the centralized system is completely honest, it's still one point where a bunch of connections come in, a bunch of connections come out. So if you can do traffic analysis on that to match up this Alice to that Bob, that's bad news. So the goal of Tor is to distribute the trust over multiple relays, so there's no single point in the system that knows which Alice talked to which Bob. So it isn't about privacy by promise. I know what you're doing, but I promise I won't tell. It's about privacy by design or privacy by construction, where the actual system separates who gets to know what about what's going on. And we've been growing in terms of bandwidth over the past many years, and the graph looks like this every time, just with different dates at the bottom. Another piece that's important, which we can talk about afterwards, Tor itself is the anonymity layer I was talking about. It tries to hide your IP address. But there's another layer, the application layer, where cookies and fonts and application versions and all the stuff inside browsers, we need to deal with that also. So Tor browser takes care of the second half of the privacy piece. And then the last point to think about is the transparency. We're a free software project. Of course, we give you design documents and specifications and source code and to explain this is what we meant to build, this is why we built it that way, this is what we built. And also we say, hi, I'm Roger, I wrote Tor. We are publicly identified people, and that transparency is important for building communities. And of course, every time I say that, there's somebody who says, oh, ha, ha, the anonymity people are talking about transparency, ha, ha. The point is, privacy is about choice, and we choose to be transparent in order to have you understand what the Tor community is and be part of the Tor community, and that's how we build trust. Okay, so that was crash course on Tor. For the next slide, let's give you the crash course on censorship resistance and the pluggable transport world. Okay, so the first arms race cat and mouse game we're in, the Tor network is made up of 8,000 relays around the world, and those IP addresses are publicly listed. So at the beginning, China could just grab the whole list, block them, it's done, you can't get to Tor. So the fix for this is what we call bridge relays, where they're not in a big public list. And then the arms race becomes, how do we give out bridges to the people who need them one at a time without letting the adversary learn all of them? So that turns out to be a hard problem, but it's at least better than the first one. And the other piece of this is not just finding IP addresses and blocking them, but blocking by protocol, by using deep packet inspection to learn, I'm not going to allow BitTorrent, I'm not going to allow HTTPS, whatever the censor chooses to block by protocol. So the fix that we have for that, originally Tor tried to look like Firefox talking to Apache. We're doing encrypted web browsing. Everybody should allow encrypted web browsing. Turns out looking exactly like that is really hard. So we tried that to fine-tune things for a while, but eventually we ended up with, let's modularize this. So we've got a bunch of different transports that take care of blending in and making you not get blocked. And then the transports deal with reachability, and Tor deals with the anonymity, privacy, traffic analysis resistance side of things. So there are a couple of pluggable transports that have worked pretty well over the past few years, and I'll talk more about them in action in a bit. The first one is OBS4. So basically it just adds another layer of encryption on top of whatever the protocol is. So there are no recognizable headers. And the idea is that when you're running your protocol classifier, it pops out BitTorrent, HTTPS, WebRTC, video, wget, whatever it pops out. And for OBS4, it pops out, I don't know. And the goal of this is the censor needs to decide, for all of the I don't knows, do I block them all? Because there's going to be a long tail of weird protocols, and allowing that long tail means that we go through, and blocking that long tail means that you block whatever protocol the new startup made last week. And in this case, this works really well in places like China, because when you block the long tail of unclassifiable things, the Great Firewall Help Desk actually gets a lot of phone calls saying, hey, my thing stopped working, can you fix it? So that's one transport that's been working. Another one that's been working is called Snowflake. The idea for Snowflake is to transform your traffic into WebRTC. The idea is you'll look like video chat, and a lot of places allow video chat through. So the other cool thing about Snowflake, because it uses WebRTC, browsers can do WebRTC natively, so Snowflake extensions in Firefox and Chrome and Brave and so on let you become a Snowflake volunteer just by adding something to your browser. You don't have to apt-get install Tor and then know how to edit a text file and so on. So that variety of volunteers that we get means, first of all, we have a lot of them, so we can change how we give them out, but also they change a lot because your browser is on a different IP address today than it was yesterday. Okay, another pluggable transport that has been useful in the past is based on domain fronting. How many people here know the word domain fronting? I see some hands, but many fewer hands than I saw before. Great. Okay, so the idea for domain fronting is I want to connect to some hugely popular cloud service like Google Cloud or Azure or something like that. And I'm going to do an HTTPS connection. And on the outside, in the server name indicator, I will list a very popular domain that hopefully they will not be willing to block. Once I've done the TLS connection inside the encryption, then I send a host header for a different domain. And all of these cloud providers up until recently allowed you to do that, where you're using encryption to get to one domain, but you're actually reaching a different website underneath. And that means from the censor's perspective, they see you talking to Stack Exchange or something like that, which they are willing to let through. And then underneath that, you're talking to a Tor proxy that sends your traffic into the Tor network. So one downside here is if you're actually using Google Cloud or Amazon Cloud, they charge you way too much. So we don't want to put all of the Tor traffic through this, but you can use it as a signaling channel or as a last option. But the basic idea is there's a domain that is too big to fail, and hopefully they won't block it, and we can act like that. Okay, and then some other, the last thing you need to know about the censorship side of things is how do we match up users to bridges, and there's a service called BridgeDB that breaks bridges into different buckets, and each bucket makes you exercise some new scarce resource. Like you have to come up from a new /16 on the internet, or a new Gmail address, or solve a CAPTCHA, and the goal of this is to separate these, so if China gets really good at having a lot of addresses, that's not enough. They also have to have a lot of Gmail addresses and be good at solving CAPTCHAs and so on. So part of the goal of that is to have a way to give bridge addresses to the users who need them without letting the adversary easily learn all of them. And Snowflake has something similar to BridgeDB called the broker, where the clients connect using domain fronting to the broker, and the volunteer snowflakes also connect to the broker, and it pairs users who are censored with volunteers who want to help them get into Tor. So far, so good? Great. Okay, so that was the crash course on everything I'm talking about here. Let's talk about what's happened over the past couple of years. So our story starts at the end of December 2021 in Russia, where in the same day, Russia ended up blocking all of the public relays by IP address. They ended up blocking the Azure domain fronting mechanism that we had. They ended up blocking a bunch of the OBS4 bridges, the ones that were easiest to find. They blocked some other ones that were harder to find, and they blocked Snowflake by protocol. And they rolled all of this out basically in the same day, and we had to piece together what was actually happening. A couple of days after that, they sent us a letter to Hetzner in Russian, basically saying your website is evil, and we're going to block it. And we didn't really know what to do with that, so after a while they blocked it. So that's the beginning of the story. And you can see the graph of number of people connecting directly to relays without using bridges or pluggable transports. And over the course of a day or so, quite a few people stopped being able to use Tor. But there's a corresponding graph of over that same time period, many people were able to switch over to using bridges in order to continue using Tor. In terms of how they blocked Snowflake in particular, it was a protocol, it was a DPI level block where we were sending a certain TLS extension in both directions, and actually normal places that do TLS only send that extension from the client side, not the server side. So that was something that you could see in the TLS handshake, and they decided to block that. We actually figured that one out pretty quickly, rolled out a fix, and because it was a fix just on the server side, the clients didn't have to change it all, and over the course of a couple of days, many people were able to switch back to using Snowflake from inside Russia. The domain fronting one was a bit more exciting. So at first I was thinking, okay, we've got this domain, it's like ajax.aspn cdn.net or something. It's some place that serves a lot of JavaScript to the world. And it's too big to fail. There's no way they'd be willing to block that. So I was trying to figure out how did they actually decide to block that domain? What's going on? And it turns out the answer is, no, they blocked the IP address. They blocked Azure by IP address. So this is my no shit, let me tell you that time we got Russia to block Azure for a day story. And did they know they were doing it and they thought it was acceptable? I don't know. Somebody in Azure noticed, and after a day or so, and rotated to a new IP address, and the block didn't follow. So it wasn't just us that they were blocking. They were blocking Skype login. They were blocking everything that Azure has, because Azure does GeoDNS. So everything that is Azure goes to that one IP address from all of that region of the world. So that was kind of exciting, and the answer was, at first we were thinking, okay, let's switch to a new domain front. Let's find something that's even bigger that they won't block. But they blocked all of Azure, which solved that arms race right there. And then Azure solved it for us afterwards. So the other fun piece of this, we put up a forum post right after that explaining, here's how, if you were blocked, here's what you should do, here's how the blocking works, here's how you can get a bridge, here's how Snowflake works. And because we had recently set up our forum on forum.torproject.net, because we were not running it. The services that we run are on torproject.org. The external third-party services are on torproject.net. Torproject.net never got blocked. So our forum worked just fine the whole time. We got a great opportunity to interact with hundreds of thousands of people who were coming there to learn all about how to get around these things. So there's some lesson in there somewhere. In terms of long term, we've lost maybe 2/3 of the people who were connecting directly using Tor directly to relays. But at the same time, we've had quite a few people coming back. The fun thing here is most people in Russia are using OBS4 to get around the censorship, and we'll see in a few more slides that a lot of people are using Snowflake in Iran. I think both of them work in both places, so it's more of a social thing, which one gets used where. So I should also say, here I am showing you 200,000 users lost and 40,000 users gained. So it's not a one-for-one map, but it's worse than that. These user estimates are extremely variable, extremely vague, extremely ambiguous. And the reason for this is those counts are assuming most users are online all day, each day. And if you're a user in Iran or Egypt or Russia or whatever, you go to the internet cafe for an hour, you leave, then we're way, way, way undercounting. So here's some way to visualize that. If we assumed all of the users that we're seeing are online only for an hour a day, it's up in the green line, up at 20 million some users. If we assume that every user is online all the time, we're the red line down there. And the blue line is the one that we actually show for these graphs. So when I'm showing you these graphs, the numbers might be higher by a factor of 10. We really don't know what the using of Tor behavior is by various populations around the world. It's a privacy system. We can talk about that later also. Okay, so another bridge distribution mechanism that we worked on when this Russia thing happened was giving out bridges by Telegram. So part of the goal there was we want to have some easy way for people to interact with us. Shouldn't be a website. Everybody's using Telegram. Telegram has worked hard on not being blocked. So we set up a bot, an autoresponder, where you ask us for bridges and we send you some bridges. And you could imagine the Russian censors would do this too. So turns out Telegram accounts are assigned numerically. So if I see your Telegram name, I know how long ago your account was made. So the hack is, if the Telegram account is older than a certain amount, give them these bridges, and if it's newer than a certain amount, give them these bridges. So this means that the Russian censorship ministry very eagerly got a bunch of new Telegram accounts and signed up, and I got all of our bridges and said, we are satisfied, we have found all the Telegram bridges. But the reality is there are a bunch of bridges like this that saw hundreds of users and were happily proxying many megabytes a second for a while until eventually somebody leaks them and they get blocked and we go to another one. And also, I should mention the importance of having people on the inside who want to tell you what's going on. We got some interesting communications from folks who work in the censorship ministry in Russia. And I don't want to write any, yes, excellent. And I don't want to write any of the words up there because I don't want somebody using stylometry or something to guess which employee that was. But they were telling us interesting stories like, my job is to download Tor browser and get bridges each day. And when I get a bridge, I put it in an Excel spreadsheet and I email it to the censors. So that's the world that they're living in. If you're imagining some sort of high-tech automated thing, that was not what was going on in 2021, 2022 in Russia. And I think that's still the case. Okay, so some other fun parts of this. We actually got contacted, I'll give you the English version of this so you can read the non-Russian. We actually got contacted by an NGO inside Russia who said, you know, I think they're blocking your website illegally. Like there's a way that they're allowed to decide to block your domain, and they didn't follow their own law. We want to sue them inside Russia. And I'm thinking, okay, I mean, sure, if you want to. And in particular, I'm thinking, I don't think you're going to succeed at this, but I want to empower you to change your country from the inside, because that, I mean, you're an NGO, we're an NGO. If this is what you want to spend your time on, go for it. So we signed a thing saying they represent us inside Russia, and they won. So that was the good news. They ended up convincing some judge that indeed the censorship ministry had not followed its own laws, and it was important for them to remove the blocking. So that was the good news. Here's the not quite so good news. The orange stuff is when it didn't work. The green stuff is after the judicial conclusion. And then, of course, the censorship ministry said, sounds good, we'll follow our laws this time and block you the appropriate way, which makes sense to me. But the good news that comes after that is they started off blocking star.torproject.org. Afterwards, they blocked www.torproject.org. So bridges.torproject.org works, forum.torproject, all the other websites are not blocked in Russia as a result of that internal lawsuit. So go them for succeeding internally. And there's a lesson there about letting people fight their own fights in their country. Another fun thing to think about on the Russia side, a bunch of people broke into the censorship ministry and took a bunch of documents and put them on the internet. So if you're interested in looking at sketchy, dodgy documents that may or may not have been planted by the Russian censorship ministry, I'm not sure. So look at them very carefully if you do, but you're the right crowd for doing that. I think the Amnesty folks have been trying to look at them, and maybe the Citizen Lab folks have been trying to look at them. So their details about what they block, how they go about blocking, what they spy on, things like that. And I think this was the first dump, but there was another much bigger dump that happened like earlier this year. So the censorship ministry has a bunch of interesting details about what it does, and this group, should learn about that as well. Okay, so where is Russia these days? They still sometimes crawl a bunch of bridges and block them, but mostly bridges last for days or weeks or more. And a lot of people are using OBS4 with Telegram, or maybe other bridge distribution strategies, or maybe they tell their friends. And Snowflake and Meek also continue to work. So the Russia story is doing pretty well, except Russia in general. There are some other problems going on. There were some stories that came out recently about how the Russian government is asking the Russian banks to check if you've paid for something that looks like a VPN. And if you have, then they call you up and you say, what's going on? Why do you need VPN? What do you have to hide? So the bank is doing the enforcement to try to discourage people. And part of the goal of something like Tor is we don't charge, it's free software, it's open source, it's freely available, so that you don't have to deal with the fact that your bank suddenly turns into the Secret Service on the government's behalf. Okay, so that was the Russia story. I'll talk a little bit more about Russia at the end, but let's talk about what happened in September 2022 in Iran. So here's the graph of people using Tor directly in Iran. They don't need bridges or pluggable transports or things like that. So while there were protests in the street, there were a lot of people, mostly on non-mobile networks, who were trying to be safe, to reach Facebook or whatever they were trying to reach that was otherwise blocked. So that was the good version of the story. So remember the previous graphs that I had where I'm like, woohoo, check out these, like we had 6,000 people using Snowflake in Russia. So that was awesome, but that was that little corner over there with 6,000 people, and we were like, cool, 6,000. And here we have hundreds of thousands of people using Snowflake. So that was a pretty big bump. And the important thing there is we found a bunch of bottlenecks while people were trying to ramp up to 6,000 that we fixed that made us ready for when the Iran thing happened and suddenly 100,000 more people wanted to use it. And because we had worked on scaling, we were ready for them. So that was a pretty cool coincidence that happened. Part of the reason why a lot of people were using Snowflake at the time was word of mouth, community inside Iran saying, hey, use this thing works to get around the censorship, and it's safe. So we had a lot of folks telling their friends to be able to do that safely. And a fun day in, I think, October 1 of 2022, we were the #1 app in the App Store in Iran, and we were the #2 app in the App Store in Iran for that day. Now, to be fair, that was just one day, and things changed after that, and I'll tell you a little bit more about how those things changed. But part of the reason why we were ready in terms of the Snowflake scalability was you can see the campaigns that we did in 2022 to try to get more volunteers running Snowflake, and then when that happened in October 2022, we were ready to grow even further. And at this point, we have 100,000 or more people running volunteer Snowflake bridges as either extensions in their browser, or if you have an actual computer that's not behind a NAT, that's much more useful. There's a Go standalone version of Snowflake. Please install it and run it and help be part of this graph. The standalone ones are the green ones down there that are the most important, and they are far fewer than 125,000. Okay, so that was the good news. Here's the more interesting, the debugging side of things. So at some point around October 5, we noticed, hey, we're handling less Snowflake traffic than we were before. What's going on? Did they block us? Is there a bug? Is there like a scaling thing? Did something fall over? So the first fix was we went to go look at the logs on the Snowflake server side, and it's giving us a bunch of too many open files. So we're like, okay, there's a bug. We fixed it. Sounds good. But then we fixed it, and it didn't actually solve the problem. The next step was, well, it can't be Iran specific because we lost 70% of our users in Iran, but also we lost like 60% of our users in the US, so it must be something about the Snowflake infrastructure. It can't be an Iran specific block because we lost users in a lot of different countries. And then we were thinking, okay, this looks like a pretty steep drop, like something specific happened here. It isn't just like an overload or a system isn't able to keep up with things. There's a particular like 10-minute period where all the bandwidth fell off. And then we were looking more and we realized even before that blocking event, there's correlation between number of users in Iran and number of users in the US and number of users in Germany, and it's a GeoIP issue. Our GeoIP database thinks that these Iranian users are in the US and Germany because GeoIP databases are especially bad for countries that aren't going to buy televisions or do e-commerce and so on. So the reality was, yes, it was users in Iran that were falling off, but we spent a couple of days being convinced that it couldn't be because, look, it's happening to a lot of countries. So at that point, we were talking to people in country, and one of them said, I could connect from my PC, but not my Mac. So there's something going on there, and that got us started on trying to figure it out. So at that point, some nice person gave us root on his Ubuntu computer in Iran, and we were testing things. Tor browser Linux works, Tor browser Android works, Orbot works, Orbot doesn't work. Wait, what's going on here? Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. And the answer, we finally figured out, inside the TLS handshake decision for Snowflake doing domain fronting to talk to the broker, it looks at whether you've got AES acceleration support. And if it does, it uses a different set of flags that are visible in the TLS handshake. And the reason why we had yes and no was on the Ubuntu computer where we ran our Android emulator, it had a real CPU, so it had AES acceleration, so it worked for us. But on an actual crappy Android system that doesn't have a good kind of CPU, it ends up not having AES acceleration, and thus it looks different from the outside. So the reality, if you had a newer version of Go, it also worked. But if you had the old version of Go and no AES acceleration, that's what got blocked. So that took us longer than it should have to figure out. But on the other hand, wow, that was a weird choice for them to choose in terms of deep packet inspection, in terms of how to distinguish whether it was Snowflake or not that they were blocking. So the fix was, there's a library called UTLS for Go that tries to make your TLS connection look like a wide variety of different types of protocols. So it knows how to look like Chrome, it knows how to look like Firefox, and so on. So we integrated UTLS into Snowflake so that it could do domain fronting to talk to the broker in a way that really blends in. We put out a new version of Orbot, and then the person replies, I can confirm this works in Iran. So woohoo, great. We fixed it, but also it took us about a week to fix it because we had to get the Ubuntu system and so on. And during that week, a lot was happening in Iran that we were not a part of. So fast forward to that was a problem that happened in October 2022. A new problem happened in September 2023, just a few months ago, and it wasn't a censorship event, but it was just as bad. So the domain front that we picked, we were using Fastly, we were using part of Stack Exchange as our domain that's too big to fail. That domain switched from Fastly to Cloudflare. And so all the Snowflake users were showing up at Fastly being like, I'm talking to Stack Exchange, can you let me through? And Fastly's like, they're not even here anymore. Why are you asking for that? So it was because the domain we had picked ended up not being where we thought it was going to be, we were unable to, all of those users were unable to connect to the Snowflake broker. So at that point we lost some number of users, and they haven't come back yet. So there's another lesson to be had there. So good news in the sense that Snowflake works in Iran, OBS4 works in Iran. There are tens of thousands of people who are using it, but it's not entirely good news. And one way to think about that is thinking about usability in terms of how this arms race works. So every time the censor does something and we fix something and they do something and we fix something, that's another step that the users have to deal with. They have to understand how the system works. They have to say, oh, I need a bridge. Oh, Snowflake doesn't work. Let me try Snowflake next week. So every time we're doing that, we're adding a burden to the users. So yes, we see a bunch of users switching from direct relay connections to using bridges, but it's not as many users. So each of these steps we lose some people, and that means that we need to slow down the arms race, not just keep on taking steps and having it be a cat and mouse game. Okay, so that was the Iran side. Let's talk about the Turkmenistan side and then the bigger picture. So these countries that I've been talking about so far, Russia and Iran, they play the censorship game that we're used to. It's the collateral damage game. It's the one where they're not going to block all of Google because too many people would get upset. So they're not willing to block certain things. Turkmenistan, on the other hand, blocks most IP addresses. They block Hetzner, they block DigitalOcean, they block OVH, they block like Amazon Cloud, they block most cloud things. They block most destination ports. So like the default stun servers that Snowflake uses, like the standard stun servers that everybody uses to do video chat, they don't work in Turkmenistan. They're blocked by destination port. So they're playing a fundamentally different game. We've been doing a couple things to try to help anyway. One of them is we found that residential addresses tend not to be blocked. So if you set up an OBS4 bridge on port 8080 on a like Comcast or something, then it tends to work. So that's a start, but though that community of people that we're working with is big enough that they tell some other people and eventually that bridge gets noticed. Meek works on, domain fronting works on Azure, but it doesn't scale, but it's at least something for the users right now. The real challenge there, so we're trying to like understand what's going on in the country, and as far as we can tell, the censorship ministry has a person there who's pleased to accept payments for you to have a real internet connection. And this means that their job is to make things so shitty that if you can pay, you will. And that's not a technical thing. Like, that's not a thing where they're going to do a DPI thing and I'm going to change some protocol stuff. That's a fundamental corruption issue where not only are they willing to accept collateral damage, but they want it. They want to make things terrible so that if you have the money to pay the bribe, you'll use it. So that's not a technical problem, that's a policy problem. I don't know what the fix is. Do we ask the dictator in Turkmenistan to assign a new person in charge of the censorship ministry who will take bribes differently? We'll talk a bit about sanctions, so that's a start. Another example that's similar in a not so technical, not so intentional censorship vein, China is getting harder and harder to use circumvention tools, not because they're blocking the circumvention tools or the VPNs and so on, it's because China is building more and more bandwidth inside the country compared to bandwidth outside the country. And that means that if you're trying to talk outside the country, you end up with 20% packet loss. And that's just a normal thing. And it causes people to say, well, Google can't run a good website. Baidu is solid and fast and easy, and Google is, I don't know, is just so flaky. I don't even try to use it anymore. So it's a form of censorship, but not in the way that we're used to. Okay, so let's talk about some of the other things that have made me upset or concerned while I was thinking about the Russia, Iran, Turkmenistan side of things. One of them was RT.com ended up censored in Europe. I'll talk more about that in a bit. And that means because a lot of the Tor exit relays are in Europe, you can't read RT.com over Tor either, because you pop out of some place in Germany or France or something and it's blocked for you there. So that's kind of a weird, surprising thing. Another weird, surprising thing, here's a heat map of where in the world the Snowflake volunteers were in July 2022. So we see a lot of them in the US, woohoo. We see a lot of them in Germany, thank you. We see a lot of them in Russia and Iran. And what I think is happening there is people in those countries here install Snowflake, and then you'll get around censorship. So then they go to install the wrong component of Snowflake. They become a Snowflake volunteer. It's not helping them get around censorship. It's probably not helping other people get around censorship because they would have a tough time reaching the rest of the Tor network from them. So this is a usability thing to think about. I think we've partially fixed this by changing the snowflake.torproject.org website to be very clear. If you're censored, do this. If you want to be a helpful person, do this. They are not the same thing. But this is one of the lessons we learned along the way. Another fun mystery, here's a graph of the number of people connecting into the Tor network during that week that Ukraine was in the news. What the heck is going on? Maybe it's a GeoIP issue, and those are actually people in Russia. Maybe those are people following some instructions on the internet to install Tor and try to DDoS the Russian websites. I don't know. It's a lot of Tor clients. Speaking of that, one of the things that happened in the U.S. and Europe soon after the Russia invasion of Ukraine is a lot of places in the U.S. are like, I'm the telephone company, but I'm going to turn off connections to Russia. That'll show them. We're going to sanction them. And the reality is, hurting connectivity for such situations ends up not doing what you want. So a brief aside, Iran had the same sort of situation. So Iran wants to build their own halal internet, their own internal internet where you don't have to go to Google because we have an Iranian Google. You don't have to go to Facebook, we have an Iranian Facebook. Everything you need is inside. And for a while there, they would block Google and people would get upset and they would say, you blocked Google, fuck you. And then Trump called up Google and said, hey, could you turn off connectivity for all the people who speak Farsi? And a bunch of Western companies essentially blocked people from Iran voluntarily. And that changed it to, you blocked Google, I don't like you, to, well, Google doesn't want me anyway. And the result of that is when they next block Google, nobody is upset very much. So we're going to see the same thing in Russia, where the telcos, like the AT&Ts and Deutsche Telekoms and so on, are like, we're going to turn off service for Russia, and all they're doing is helping Russia build its own isolated internet out of this. Okay, so that was the beginning of the sanctions rant. I ended up talking to a guy from Germany who was in Berlin helping to write the censorship document that the EU requested. So the EU ended up asking all of the countries in the EU to block RT.com, RussiaToday.com. And I don't mind blocking television channels, sounds good, but blocking internet websites, I thought the people who block things are the bad guys and the people who allow freedom of speech are the good guys. What's going on here in terms of Europe being excited to also implement their own censorship regime? So I've been trying to figure out how to communicate this properly. And I was talking to him and I'm like, so why do you like censorship so much? And he's like, no, they're sanctions. And I'm thinking, okay, well, whatever word we're using, why is it that you're so excited to be rolling out the censorship? And then I was talking to somebody from UNI, from the Open Observatory of Network Interference, and he was saying, yeah, Romania looked at this EU document and said, oh, we're supposed to block all misinformation websites. So they built a multi-megabyte list of URLs that they wanted to block, and their reasoning was, EU asked us to do this censorship. So and it ended up blocking like a software update website and so on. That's not what was supposed to happen. And then I was trying to figure out more details, and he's like, no, don't worry. It's a 6-month experiment, and in 6 months we're going to reassess whether we should maintain the sanctions. And I'm thinking, okay, so you asked people to buy, install, configure, roll out censorship infrastructure, and what, in 6 months they're going to unroll it out? That's not how this works. So I'd like your help trying to figure out how to communicate this to people. Why is the EU so excited to make sure that all of your countries here have censorship infrastructure also? And how do we communicate that this is it's not sanctions, it's censorship? Why do you like to censor so much? Okay, and as a last couple of thoughts, one of the weird things about the Russia story, our story started in December. The news started talking about Russia invading Ukraine in like February. So there were months in between where Russia knew they were doing it. We knew something weird was going on. So looking at censorship of Tor from a global perspective is an interesting way to try to figure out what's going on in the world and what's going to be happening later. So some things that you can do to help: please run bridges, OBS4 bridges, snowflakes, public relays. The EFF is running a campaign right now to get relays in universities in particular, so I would love to talk to you afterwards if you're connected to a university. It doesn't have to be an exit relay, whatever you can do. One big policy question, why I'm in the ethics track, is how do we deal with situations like Turkmenistan, where it's not a cat and mouse technical game, it's like a nation-state level corruption game. And there's research. There's a conference in Bristol this coming July called PETS, or FOCI, on censorship and anonymity. And also tomorrow, day 3, we have 3 different Tor meetups. The first one is a general meetup. I think there will be 2 people who are doing little lectures on cool stuff they've been doing in Tor, and we'll be around to talk to you and answer questions. After that, there's a relay operator meetup in the room next door. So if you run a relay, or you ran a relay, or you want to run a relay, or you don't yet know you want to run a relay, we want to talk to you and help answer whatever your questions are and show you that there's a community. And then after that, the folks who run the torservers.net Relay Association want to talk to other relay associations and people who want to help the German community rebuild their Zwiebelfreunde and other groups like that. We would love to chat with you. And that's the end of my way too many slides, and I still have some time for questions. So thank you.
We see already 2 people knowing how it works with the microphones. You queue up behind the microphones, and then I call out the microphone number. And you can also ask questions via the internet. So while people are moving around to queue up behind the microphones, we will have the question from the internet first.
Yeah, thank you. First question from the internet. Are you aware of any legal actions or violence against Tor users in Russia, Iran, Turkmenistan? And can these users maybe get fingerprinted?
Yeah, so in general, most people seem to be successful using Tor in these countries, and they're doing fine. Like the US and Germany, there are too many laws in these countries, and some of them are vague. A lot of the countries have laws, but they don't use them, but they could use them, so it's hard to feel confident about that. There were some cases in Russia where some people ran Tor relays, and they ended up attracting attention, and it worked out for them in the end, but it took a while of legal fighting. But in general, using tools like Tor or VPNs, everybody's doing it. And the fact that everybody's doing it is part of the safety of being able to do it. So we'll see over the next year or 2, as Russia tries to crack down on VPNs even more, are they going to make it even weirder to be the sort of person who wants an actually free internet? I'm not sure. But for now, everybody's doing it, which is why maybe it's okay.
And we have lots of questions, so keep them short and no comments and no follow-up questions. Microphone number 2, please.
Hi. Do you know if that sudden spike in Iran has something to do with like a failure of another way to circumvent censorship? Because a lot of people used to use Siphon there.
So you're wondering if the spike in users in Iran is because some other circumvention tool failed and they all switched? I think there are enough people in Iran trying to use the internet that there's enough to go around on all cases. It is the case that there are other circumvention tools, and some of them did get blocked right about then. But I think it was more, there are a lot of people, and mostly they don't do this, and when they need to, they do whatever they did last time. And some of them did Siphon last time, some of them did Tor last time, and now a lot of people know about Snowflake, which means the next time something happens, a lot of them are going to turn to Snowflake.
And then we have a question from microphone number 1.
You had commented that a on the whole new user group. Do you have an additional explanation except for installing the wrong plugin side of things?
Yeah, well, I talked to somebody from Ukraine who was convinced that that people in Russia are reasonable, and a lot of Russia isn't blocked. Their ISPs don't choose to follow the censorship requests. So it could be that there are many people in Russia who said, this is important, I want to help my fellow people, the ones who are on the bad kind of networks, I need to help them get around censorship. So it's
nothing
hard
from the state there or something like that, trying stuff, I guess.
Yep, hard to know.
And then we're going to hear what the internet wants to know.
Yeah, second question from the internet, specific to one of your slides. On the graphs regarding to the number of Snowflake and OBFS2 users, what happened exactly in the beginning of 2023?
Yeah, so when we were fixing some, so the question is, the Snowflake users were going up, everything was going great, and then at the beginning of 2023, the Snowflake users in Russia disappeared, and then they came back a while later. And at the end of 2022, with the Iran thing, we were trying to fix even more scaling issues because we were, the Snowflake bridges are handling many gigabits per second of traffic. And we had so much traffic that we were trying to figure out ways to scale better. And we accidentally added a bug that made it scale worse. And we noticed it after a couple of weeks and fixed it, but that was the result. But as a result, there were users who used something else for that.
And then we have a question from microphone number 3.
Yes, I have the question. There was a journalist called Yasha Levine, and he was criticizing you. And how do you feel about that? Like concerning government funding, like always errors possible, the like useful idiots thing, like with the opposition on Hong Kong overtly relying on technology. Also, I think he suggested that you have had an internship at the NSA. And also, some security professionals suggest that you shouldn't use Tor browser, you should use like Tor plus Chrome. How do you feel about that?
Ooh. The third one is easy. So let me try to answer all of them in brief. We as an organization are transparent. We do get funding from governments. We've got funding from the US government, the Swedish government. For a little while we had funding from the German Foreign Ministry. All of that you can find in the Tor financials, which we publish each year. So part of the goal of that is to be transparent about where, not just where the money comes from, but what we do with it. To say these are the projects that we have, these are the outputs, and to do all of that in public so that it isn't a question of why did they want to give us money. This is a complicated topic that I can't answer in just 20 seconds, but the answer to all of that is transparency. For the third one, don't use Tor browser, use your hacked together Tor plus Chrome. That is a terrible, terrible idea because of all the fixes inside Tor browser at the application layer. So afterwards, I would be happy to tell you a bunch of, we would call them 0 days using Tor and Chrome, but they're not 0 days, they're like 10 years, where everybody has known about them, and they're basically proxy bypass issues, where if you use Tor and Chrome, you'll end up sending traffic out directly on your local network, bypassing the Tor proxy, because Chrome doesn't care. So that's the very short version of that.
And then we have a question from microphone number 2.
Hi, great talk. I have a question. Have any of these countries tried sabotaging Tor from the inside? For example, running dodgy relays or overloading it with a denial of service?
Yes. Running dodgy relays from Russia and Iran and so on, we have not seen. As far as we know. There is a strange arms race going on at the edges where somebody somewhere is trying to run some bad relays. In terms of denial of service, whoo boy, that's been a big topic over the past few years. Because as far as we can tell, there are Russian underground mobsters trying to sell drugs or whatever on the internet, and there are other Russian underground mobsters also trying to do it, and they're beating on each other, and the collateral damage is the Tor network. So we've seen a bunch of DDoS issues, but I think they're unrelated to the government level policy thing that we're seeing here. I think they're more related to people who are being sanctioned to the point that they want to make US dollars somehow, and that's how they've picked.
Then we have a question from microphone number 4.
Thank you for the great talk. This may be an off-topic question, but since you work on privacy, which messenger would you recommend to use?
Which messenger would I recommend to use? The answer used to be Ricochet back in the day when there was Ricochet development. I use Signal for a bunch of things because a lot of people use Signal for a bunch of things. So that's a pretty good answer. And we know the Signal people. We talked earlier about the importance of transparency and community. So that depends on the person and what they're trying to do, but use the ones that your friends want to talk to you on is not a bad first start.
As long as it's end-to-end encrypted.
Yeah, use the safe one that your friends want to talk to you on.
Thank you.
The internet has a question.
Yes. The internet would like to know, do you plan to support some sort of transport via DNS, for example, if everything else than DNS is blocked?
Yes, there is a pluggable transport people are working on called DNSTT. It's a pluggable transport that makes DNS requests and tunnels your Signal traffic or your Tor traffic as though it looks like DNS. And one of the cool outcomes of that is maybe we can all use Tor on our trains or airplanes or something where DNS works but other things don't. So yes, that's something that's under development. And as things like OBS4 and Snowflake stop being the right answer, then things like DNSTT might start being the right answer.
And then we have a question from microphone number 1.
So do you have any proposals when it comes to circumventing like this exit node censorship? Because I guess that like when it comes to exit nodes, most of them like runs in EU or US or something, and as what we see now in the case of EU, that if they try to collectively just want to ban things, is there a kind of a
Yeah, so that's a tough one. I've been talking here about censorship of people trying to reach the Tor network, but what you're talking about is censorship of people trying to use Tor to reach websites, and the websites don't want to hear from Tor users, or there's something in between that's making it hard to do. And at the beginning we said, oh, well, let's just not let relays be exits in countries that have too much censorship. And that line gets blurry very quickly. Maybe you end up with all of your network in Iceland or something. That probably doesn't scale. There have been people working on exit bridges. So it's a bunch of proxy addresses that you can use to be able to reach websites without them knowing that it's Tor. There's a campaign that we've been hoping to start sometime to go talk to Cloudflare and Akamai and all the big CDNs to teach them why privacy is important. There was a study that Akamai did years ago where they looked at all the people connecting over Tor to Macy's.com, like the place where you buy clothing, and they found that the average connection was more likely to be malicious because there are people doing spam attacks or something, but the chance that they would buy something was the same over Tor as not over Tor. So actually those are real users that maybe you want to have. And that was interesting for Akamai to say. So I think there's there's something to be done there, but we need to, that's like a 10-person for 5-year campaign to make relationships and educational materials and so on. So yeah, that's a hard problem and a one that is growing in importance.
Thank you.
Good, and we have more questions than we have minutes left, so microphone number 2.
During the Iranian part, you promoted the running of Snowflake servers on computers that are not behind NAT. Under which conditions should one run a Snowflake server, and when should one run an OBS4 bridge, for instance, on a non-residential IP address?
OBS4 bridges are easier to run technically because they're in Debian and you edit text files and they work pretty well. But if you're comfortable like compiling Snowflake from Go, or you're comfortable running a Docker image for Snowflake, Snowflakes tend to use more bandwidth than OBS4 bridges because they'll scale up to as much as you can. For OBS4, you need to be reachable from the outside, so you need to do like TCP port forwarding. For Snowflake, it's best if you like forward entire blocks of UDP ports so that WebRTC can work behind whatever firewall you have. So they're both useful. Do whichever you like. Don't do both of them on one IP address, because then whichever one is weaker gets you blocked.
And then we have a question from microphone number 3.
Why wouldn't a proliferation of Snowflake bridges in Russia and Iran indicate enumeration of Snowflake users?
So you're saying maybe the censors want to learn who the users are, and so they're signing up Snowflakes in their country in order, and because they're in the country, they're probably run by the government. So the flaw in the logic is that it's easier to get something on Hetzner than it is to run something inside Iran, even if you're the Iranian government. So if I were Iran and I wanted to do that, I'd run a bunch of Snowflakes elsewhere. And the other answer to the question of how bad would that be, is that bad? The goal of Tor is to prevent the adversary from learning that this user went to that destination. Just learning that they're trying to use Snowflake goes back to the earlier question we were talking about of this is an ordinary thing to do. The fact that the average user in Iran is using Tor to reach Facebook to look at their cat pictures is a security property. It needs to be ordinary that you're using Tor, or you're right, things go bad.
We only have time for one more question, and that will be from the internet.
Thank you. If we look back into the year 2013, when the Snowden topic came up, Tor played a very important role, and the NSA thought literally that Tor stinks. Do you have any indication that it still just stinks, or whether or not the NSA is taking active countermeasures against Tor?
Yeah, this is a great question. And the real answer is that we need a new ed every week or two coming out with a new set of documents for what they've been up to lately in terms of what they learned. And even back then, the documents that we got, Ed tried to bring as much as he could about Tor out. The documents that we saw showed the NSA didn't know what they were doing, but that doesn't mean there's not an analyst down the hall that did know what they were doing and didn't get their documents leaked. So it's hard to know what to conclude here. I've talked to people in the NSA who say that they use and rely on Tor, and it's got the right design, and it's hard for them to break. That doesn't mean that much either. In terms of what we should be worried about in the future, one of the things we're worried about is net flow-based traffic analysis, where a growing number of countries and companies are collecting logs of when you're connected, for how long, how many bytes got sent, and a growing data retention trend around the world makes me nervous, because maybe you have a data set here and you call up the Spanish telco and they have a corresponding data set over here, and hey, maybe these do match up. So I would worry about that, but if you want to help on the traffic analysis research side, we'd love to have your help, and PETS coming up in July is the right place for that.
Good. Give Roger a big round of applause.
Thank you.